Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Charles, and today's Bringing It All Back Home episode is going to be a little different. This one's kind of harking back to an episode I did 2 years ago, or actually it's 3 years ago, on the nature of kind of mysteries hanging out in South Jersey, a little bit of research, stuff that is getting into a collection of tangents or connected themes. The first one was kind of all about mystery behind Patti Smith. That was followed up not long afterward with a connection to Robbie Robertson and the band and the local empty lot that was Tony Mart's. Today is going to be slightly different, but kind of presented in a similar way. This one is about the mystery behind a single photograph, and it concerns a very interesting person named Harry Houdini. It takes place in Atlantic City, and it does take place 110 years ago, so this would be 1916 in the summer. In Atlantic City at a particular pier that today is almost like an empty space. It used to be called the Garden Pier. There is barely anything left of the Garden Pier. But yeah, today's theme and today's episode is going to relate to photography, but it is going to branch out a bit more. So yeah, buckle in. I hope you guys are going to like this one. And it does concern... To begin the journey, it does concern itself with a pier. So I'm going to start this one off kind of reeling it way back to an episode in the book by James Joyce, Ulysses. So to set the scene behind this quote from Ulysses, the teacher, the young teacher, Stephen Daedalus, is having another one of his somewhat boring and repetitious mornings before the day kicks in. Interestingly, this day is renowned and celebrated all the time throughout the world as Bloomsday. But anyhow, Bloom isn't yet in the picture. It's this is almost like a carryover, this first chapter or two of Ulysses from the book Portrait of the Artist as a young man. But yeah, what we're getting at now is basically Stephen's in his classroom with these young kids, and his mind's always elsewhere, and he's just running them through some history, some Latin, and he's addressing the class about the famous battle, which, if you're interested in, has been recently gone over with the Rest of History podcast. And that concerns the Romans and Carthage, and particularly this famous battle by Pyrrhus. So it starts out, he just says to the class, what was the end of Pyrrhus? And people were raising their hands, and this one particular kid who's never paying attention, named Armstrong, and he looks at him and goes, "You, Armstrong, do you know anything about Pyrrhus?" And Armstrong, of course, does not have an answer. He hasn't been paying attention. "Pyrrhus, sir?" And you know, Daedalus, Stephen's just looking at him, and he comes up off the top of his head. Pyrrhus, a pier. And everyone else in the classroom's laughing because Pyrrhus is not a peer. He's a general who keeps losing men every time he's supposedly defeating the Romans. So he's winning the battles, but at the end of all these battles, he's got hardly any soldiers left. And there is a kind of, a famous quote from Pyrrhus that has lived on called "Another victory like that and we're lost." Another such victory and we're lost, referring to the fact that the victory just keeps wiping out all of his men. Hence the term a Pyrrhus, a Pyrrhic victory is not quite the victory you want. That has lived on. Anyhow, we're back in Dublin on this famous Bloomsday. The whole book takes place in one day. And Stephen is just sort of like, he's not laughing. He's actually intrigued by what Armstrong has just said. It's kind of woken him up a little bit. So again, he's like, it all started with him just asking the class, what was the end of Pyrrhus? And he picks on Armstrong. And Armstrong's just like, Pyrrhus? A pier. So he nudges the guy. He nudges the kid, Armstrong. And he goes, tell me now. So he pokes on me. He goes, what is a pier? And Armstrong thinks about it. He goes, a pier, sir? A thing out in the waves. A kind of bridge. Kingston Pier, sir. Which is not a bad answer. It's a thing out in the waves. And some laugh again. What is Stephen? Stephen just looks at him and goes, yeah, Kingston Pier. Yes, a disappointed bridge. And that's the quote. So I opened this episode up with this idea about piers, because this photo, which is what today's theme is all about, this photo is of Harry Houdini hanging upside down, being suspended at the very end of the original garden pier at a theater, which was the whole point of this original pier. And it was called originally the B.F. Keith Theater, the Garden Pier Theater. And Houdini had been in Atlantic City many times before, and now he was kind of trying to raise some attention to his gig by performing a stunt. And this is a fantastic photo. It is just all these people at the end of the pier just gawking at Harry Houdini being suspended from a crane upside down. And of course, he's in a straitjacket. But where I really wanted to bring the idea of this episode a little bit more together wasn't just the amazement of Harry Houdini in Atlantic City hanging out at one of our piers. Anyhow, there's a lot of resonance for me in just that word, pier. Where I used to work recently, up until recently, seemingly recently, that was the name of the pier. They just went all minimal. Instead of calling it $1 Million Pier, it was just called The Pier. Anyhow, going back to that quote, a pier, sir, a thing out in the waves, a kind of bridge. And what's been added to that wonderful quote is another quote by a more recent British writer named Julian Barnes, and he amplifies that. His quote is, a pier is a disappointed bridge, but if you stare at it long enough, you can dream it to the other side. And in his full quote, it's, you can dream it to the other side of the channel, referring to the channel leading, if you could you imagine it as a bridge going all the way out to France, or over the English Channel. So and here growing up, you could kind of imagine when you anywhere in the Jersey Shore, when you look out over that horizon and you look up the waves and your eyes can't go any further. Literally, if you just somehow went in a straight line across the Atlantic Ocean, you would be in part of, not UK, I guess, you would probably from Jersey, New Jersey, South Jersey, you would probably head straight to like Portugal, Spain, somewhere around there, depending on, I guess, the exact route you went. But more importantly, what started this journey for me, what triggered this photo, was just a whole bunch of seemingly connected things that has happened to me in the last couple of months, and particularly just a few days ago. And that involves a whole bunch of characters. So in this journey today on the podcast, we're going to be bringing back on Jim Morrison, The Doors, The Three Stooges, Houdini, Arthur Conan Doyle, and really just the whole idea of the other side, this idea of the other side. And of course, for Jim Morrison and for Arthur Conan Doyle, and in lots of ways, right here in Atlantic City, the other side was connecting to loved ones who had passed away. And really how that journey of a connection to the other side, meaning people who have passed away, people who have died, how that other side has impacted photography, even including a very, very famous incident, which we'll be getting to today as well, that happened in the UK, pretty much about 10 years after this photo, or maybe a little bit less than 10 years. There was a wonderful incident involving two young girls and what are known as fairies, the supernatural beings that had somehow appeared in a photograph. So, all right, let's return to Houdini. So I was able to find, through the magic of Google searching, the one of the actual articles from that day. So it's the summer of 1916, and the headline is "Houdini's Stunt Thrills Bathers." And then the sub part of that is "Escape from Straitjacket Hung at Peak of Pier Tower," referring to the tower, a part of this BFK theater, "draws crowd in Atlantic City." And Atlantic City, New Jersey, August 2nd, one of the few diversions of an otherwise calm and peaceful day was a stunt which Harry Houdini, the handcuff expert, did to the delight of some several thousands of promenaders on the beach and boardwalk shortly before noon today. Houdini, who has a reputation for escaping from everything, which the average person considers escape-proof, permitted himself to be encased in a straitjacket by Chief of Police Miller. And it goes on. So, yeah, I love the idea that this is a local event. I especially love the idea that there is so much hidden history in Atlantic City, and that was a big part of the theme of those last two episodes on Patti Smith and where she used to live with her mom, the band, Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm, where there is now an empty lot in Summers Point. And any day you want, as you're strolling out on the Atlantic City Boardwalk, just past Steel Pier, there used to be another pier there, and that pier was called Garden Pier. And again, today there is absolutely nothing left of it, although there is sort of a vague kind of bogus entrance to Garden Pier when then you step out a little bit beyond the boardwalk and the pier's gone. So there's, I guess, some metaphors or hidden analogies there to the condition of Atlantic City these days. Anyhow, that was the location of this marvelous event, and this black and white photo of Houdini hanging upside down. And this is the theme of Houdini in so many ways, was I have the ability to break on through what is going to hold back everybody else. And he's just Houdini was just seemingly a regular guy. He was just yet another immigrant, changed his name. I think his real name was Eric Weiss. His family came over from Germany, and his stunts, his promotion, his need to keep upping the ante of what could not be explained. This boundary between magic and performance obviously captured a lot of people's imaginations and became really a popular figure. Let's say the theme of this episode is breaking on through. I'm going to reapproach this theme of break on through from another side, the more obvious side, and that would be Jim Morrison. So what really kind of inspired me was just a few days ago, Sunday, the the band known as the Ultimate Doors came around Atlantic City, came to the Borgata, and they were just like this period correct, fanatical reproduction with all the original stuff, the original amps, the original Ludwig drums, Ray Manzarek's original Gibson organ, and of course the Fender bass gizmo he's got there. So his left hand is just playing bass notes on this small little keyboard. His right's doing all the organ stuff. And a very spectacular young man doing his best Jim Morrison, especially his vocals when it came to screams, was amazing. He really had a lot of the tone and ferocity of Morrison at his peak, and somebody doing Robbie Krieger. Take that for what it is. I was amazed by it. And as I was sitting in that theater, very close to the stage, I couldn't help but remember a close friend of mine who had passed away now, 16 years ago. His name was Jim also, James Francis Gracie. We used to call him Gracie. Jim Gracie and I were very, very close friends in different parts of our youth, especially when we were both into literature, and we were living in the same house called on Academy Street in Glassboro. And there was a particular summer of '85, where we were both fanatical Doors fans, from not just from the music, but what the biography of Morrison had led us to. So people who were into Morrison would read these biographies, which would then turn them on to all the literary influences that Morrison was into. So it was kind of this chain reaction. So if you're into Morrison, next thing you know, you're reading Friedrich Nietzsche. If you're into Morrison, you're reading Aldous Huxley, because that's where the Doors name came from. If you're into Morrison, maybe you would suddenly go off on this Arthur Rimbaud stuff, So we were both literary folks, and Jim and I loved to read a lot. And Jim kind of had this sort of this inspiration from Jim Morrison's theme of breaking on through, meaning, whether you're breaking on through from what holds you back, whether you're breaking on through to another kind of heightened reality, whether you're breaking on through to maybe, unfortunately, indulging in a lot of hallucinogens, which was one tragic thing that Jim, unfortunately, that same summer started getting drawn into. Anyhow, that's a much longer story. Not going to go there. Jim and I both had this thing about Morrison and the whole Doors theme. I even, at that summer, decided to take a pause in my illustrious English major career at Glassboro, and I went out to LA, and I went out to Venice, and I was thinking of becoming a part-time student at UCLA, also the same journey that Morrison went on, and I got to see a lot of those sites around Venice. And meanwhile, our friend Jim Gracie had gone much, much deeper into the idea of breaking on through, again, with the hallucinogens. So I'm at this concert 2 nights ago. Jim has long since passed away. He passed away in 2010. And there's like an empty seat in front of me, I guess because this is, again, at that one of the casinos, so maybe somebody just didn't make it to this show. And there were so many points in this show where I was thinking like, oh, Jim Gracie would absolutely have loved this concert. He would absolutely. I could just picture him sitting there with me. And then at some point, it even became this sort of, is Jim Gracie kind of like, there's that fanciful thing you can have with old friends or family members who passed away, where you can suddenly feel like, well, let's just ride with this. Let's imagine that they are here with me. Let's just imagine that they're sharing this experience with you. I bring this up right now. Sorry about this longer tangent. I bring this up because that is the theme in a way as well when it comes to breaking on through, particularly with Houdini and particularly with his new pal. So let's find out, who is this pal of Houdini's I'm referring to. As you might have guessed, if you guys are fans of Houdini and you know about the area and the history of Atlantic City, you may have guessed that the friend I'm talking about is none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who invented Sherlock Holmes, the man who sticks to the facts, the man who is a wealth, an encyclopedia of knowledge, someone who is so determined to not let bullshit get in their way and find out what is the real thing. How could the author of this character have been so easily swayed by the most popular form of entertainment at the time, which were seances, which were communicating with the dead, which were just falling for practically any, just any, just barely reasonable form of ideas. But he was completely drawn into it. So I do have here a quote from Doyle about one of his first encounters with Houdini. It was a wonderful evening, especially Mr. Houdini gave a perfectly amazing performance in which he had been packed into a bag and the bag into a trunk, corded up and locked, and he was out again only a few seconds later. And I may add, again, this is Arthur Conan Doyle writing about this, I may add that Houdini is not one of those shallow men who imagine they can explain away spiritual phenomena as parlor tricks, but that he retains an open and ever, I think, more receptive mind toward mysteries which are beyond his art. So there you go. Doyle is at least aware that he's a great conjurer, that he's one of the greatest illusionists, but at the same time, he's already reading into this newfound friend things that Houdini doesn't actually have, which is this quest for spiritual, mysteries that need to be included. One of the tragic problems for Arthur Conan Doyle was being able to get over the loss of his son. His son had been severely injured in, I think, the Battle of the Somme, and his son had died shortly afterward. Complications, I think, from probably the poison gas, what have you. This is a time in Conan Doyle's life where he's even more vulnerable to what were already was a very, very strong inclination for looking for answers that aren't scientific, looking for a world that is not revealed, and maybe there's a way he can bridge it. So him and his wife, of course, latch on to what was enormously popular at the time. And I think doing the research for this podcast, this is a point I can't underemphasize. It's 2026. We've got our obsessions right now and things that are so the norm for us. 100 years ago and even further back, what had been gaining in popularity beyond just a fad was this idea of the Ouija board, was this idea of the seance. And in the right performance, you could say, it is a kind of performance. In the right performance, meaning the room's going to get darkened. We're going to invite a little bit of our unconscious, our subconscious. We're going to let that part of us in and that part of us out that we close off during our regular waking time. This kind of re-emphasize a sort of waking dream state. We will be able to connect with our deceased loved ones. We will be able to create this bridge, that hadn't been there before. Again, going back to where this episode opened, what is a pier? A disappointed bridge. Well, here is, what is our reality? We can only see what's alive. We can only see what's living right now. We don't have a vision, a way to somehow connect with people who are not living. Well, 100 years ago or more, that impossibility seemed flexible. There seemed to be people truly, and they would swear to it to their dying day, truly in the belief or under the belief that they had communicated with this other side. So you know what's going to happen. Pardon me. You know this is inevitable. Here's Harry Houdini. He's that one. On one hand, one of the most skilled technical illusionists and magicians, really, who's always out for a good stunt, who's always up for some good publicity, who's very, very close to his family, including his wife and his mother. And here's his pal, a world-renowned author who's created one of the most eternal characters of all time. Here's something that will live forever, which is Sherlock Holmes is always going to get reinvented. And they're now both dealing with loss. So, Conan Doyle has lost his son. And for Houdini, he's lost his mother. His mother passed away. So the inevitable happens. Where does it happen? It happens in Atlantic City. It happens right here in South Jersey. Right here, a couple of blocks up the road, right on that same Atlantic City boardwalk, the two of them were sharing a summer getaway right here in AC. So the details are interesting. So where they were staying was, I believe, the Ambassador Hotel. Let me double check this just to make sure I'm not getting this wrong. Yeah, no, that was correct. So I'm going to read a little bit of a blurb. This was from Atlantic City Weekly that was recapping this episode. So the photo that began this podcast was taken in 1916 during his summer stunt at the pier known as the Garden Pier, and the theater at the end of this Garden Pier, which is the whole reason why you went on this pier, called B.F. Keith's Theater. So now it's a couple years later. It's June 1922, and they're in town together, and they are staying at the Ambassador. So if you're curious, where is the Ambassador? Parts of the Ambassador are the bones of this hotel are still around because they converted this hotel into the Tropicana. So if you've been to AC and you're curious to know where was this location, parts of it are still they basically stripped the Ambassador down to its steel, frame. And then over that, they created the Tropicana Hotel. So they're staying at the Doyle Suite, or rather they each have a room there. But more specifically, at that suite. So it's Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife, Lady Jean Conan Doyle. They began a seance on a Sunday night in June. We actually have the full date here, June 18th, to bring into the room possibly the spirit of Houdini's mother. So this is reading from the article. The room was quiet as a gentle a breeze floated through the window. Doyle began with a prayer, giving thanks to the Almighty for this breaking down of the walls between two worlds. And he then said, "Can we receive another sign from our friends from beyond?" And they began a seance. Using a process known as automatic writing, Arthur Conan Doyle's wife, Lady Jean, picked up a pencil and began transcribing a message from the next world. So that's where we are. We're in Atlantic City now. It's 6 years later from that photo that began the podcast of Houdini hung upside down, down from the tower of the Keith Theater. Now we're in the Ambassador Hotel, and we are supposedly communicating with Houdini's deceased mother. All right, so I'm going to just pause right there. We're going to come back to the Ambassador Hotel. We're going to come back to South Jersey. But I want to take a little detour. And this, I promise, is the last part of the major detours. So again, Started with the pier, started with James Joyce, this concept of the pier possibly being misinterpreted as a disappointed bridge, when a little bit of a diversion into Jim Morrison because the theme of breaking on through. Brought up my good friend Jim Gracie at this concert, thinking of him, thinking of loved ones we've lost who would possibly be able to communicate with us. And now we're going to take one more little detour, particularly for photography. This is so important. And that is this famous episode. And you could really say it was quite an extended episode called the Cottingley, 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 the Cottingley Fairies. So what the heck is that? Be honest, I have not been that aware of the Cottingley Fairies, and I'm really glad I did the research. So the story is that somewhere in Bradford, England, or near Bradford, England, which is where this place Cottingley is, there were two cousins who were spending the summer together, and one was named Elsie, and the younger one was named Frances, and they were scolded by their mom a couple of times for, especially, I believe it's Elsie, for spending too much time in this little creek behind the village or the town, what they called the Beck, the Cottingley Beck. And they would like to go there just to goof off and just to kind of like not have to deal with whatever the hardships were of doing stuff around the house, etc. They would play together at the bottom of this garden, this beck, where there was a little bit of a stream and some running water there. And they would come back and say, well, why are your feet all wet? Stop doing this. Stop getting your clothes soaking wet at this beck, And they began telling them that the reason they were out there so long was they were communicating with fairies, And there's a whole history that's very fascinating too about the idea of fairies, especially to parts of the UK, and one thing to remember too is that, we think of the word fairies now as in like fairy lights or fairies in appearing in a Walt Disney movie, but they were originally known not necessarily to be these little spirits who were all sweetness and fairy dust, right? They were actually known originally to be kind of pranksters. The original idea of fairies were that they were extremely small. They were, I guess you could say, they were almost like a little mixture of like a gremlin to some degrees. I think what we think of gremlins, always up to some mischief. That was really sort of the idea of what fairies were. Anyhow, they straight-faced were telling their parents that they were not only able to see fairies, but they could, they could communicate with them. So it just so happened that the young woman, Elsie, her father was a really keen amateur photographer, and he had his own darkroom. So, Frances would actually help him in the darkroom, and she began to understand how to use the camera. So they had spent time together working in the studio, and the story goes that basically they went out and took some photos using a camera called a Midge, M-I-D-G, a Midge quarter plate, and they came back with some photos to prove that they had actually seen fairies right there, right behind their location, this little beck, So I'm going to leave links, and of course, many links for this particular episode. And there's some fantastic links to both a really good YouTube video explaining the backstory, as well as some great, even just the general Wikipedia article is fantastic. The photos are wonderful. So as you can imagine, they were walking into a world where people were willing to believe this had happened, that these photos were actually showing real fairies. as well as some people are going, you got to be kidding me. Like this is obviously a a simple trick where they had done a multiple exposure, and one picture would most likely have been the girls just sitting there, and they had taken another picture and they had merged the two using technology that was known at the time that you could do in a darkroom. Well, one of the problems was once the father and friends of his father, of her father, once they passed the photos around, they were like, no, these negatives are the original. This was not done with using multiple exposure. So that began to make their claim a lot more interesting. And sure enough, through friends of a friend, Conan Doyle got involved in this stuff. So Conan Doyle was he was a regular contributor to a famous magazine at the time called The Strand. And once Conan Doyle jumped onto this craze, it just blew up. It went viral, you might say, for its day. So, Doyle wrote an article in the December 20 issue of The Strand containing 2 high-resolution prints of the original 1917 photographs, and the magazine sold out within days. Within days. So this all happened, not, very, very, so we're talking about December 1920 is when the Cottingley Fairy, the article was called Fairies Photographed, an epic-making event described by Arthur Conan Doyle. So he's pushing, he believes it. He absolutely believes it. He's completely sold that these photos are absolutely breaking through to another reality that is showing that we do exist with creatures like fairies and gnomes. We are making the connection, and our technology is proving that this connection does exist. All right, so I want to take one little sub-dive tangent here that does relate to this story about the Cottingley Fairies, which I was not looking for, but it is it is something that kind of threw me a little bit. But that's how it goes. I suppose once you start down a road, you never know where the connections start appearing. Many folks around the world were intrigued by the fact, and this story eventually faded out. Other more important things happened in the world in the 30s and 40s. So eventually the Cottingley Fairy stuff kind of faded away from public consciousness. But people were still intrigued. What was going on? And the 2 young women, they were still around. They had survived. And when they would be interviewed, they stuck to their story. They're like, no, we didn't mean, and this is a true part of the story, they did not mean for this thing to go viral. This was something just between them and their father and their darkroom and their little beck behind their house, so or near where they lived. So let's fast forward just a ways away. So it's the 40s, it's the 50s, it's the 60s. Now it's finally the 70s. They have still not changed their story. They're much older now. They're available to be interviewed. Nope, we saw. We were work. This is they're completely committed to the story. It's gone on so long. They're not reversing course. Back here in the U.S., another magician and author who was intrigued by this story decided to do another round about it. And he at the time was embracing technology, in this case early computer technology. And so this was the 70s, so nothing really outrageous in terms of the computer world yet. He published an article trying to show to anyone who was interested that no, in fact, these photos were obviously just using the templates of a book that anybody could get their hands on. His investigation was for the committee for the scientific investigation of claims of the paranormal, And what they had determined was that the stories, I'm sorry, the shapes of the fairies that came out in these photos were a perfect imitation of illustrations from a very popular book, a book called, from the author named Claude Sheppersons, had a book called Princess Mary's Gift Book. And in that gift book were illustrations of dancing fairies, and they perfectly matched up. If you go to the Wikipedia article about this stuff, the Cottingley Fairies, and you compared the shots of the fairies with the illustrations, they're a perfect match. A perfect match. So it was pretty obvious to this magician that these were cutouts based on these illustrations, and they were most likely just propped up in the photo, and you just could not make out what they were propped up with. And he was able to basically make, I guess using computers and using some other technology, which isn't really specified, he was able to just make out, yeah, as a magician, I can see these were just propped up with something. His name is James Randi. Another James. James Randi and Jim Gracie and I came into contact. So remember I was talking about how Jim Gracie and I were into all this literary stuff, and we went to school together, and well, we would have literary get-togethers called coffee houses. I don't know if anybody still uses that phrase, but I guess they do. We didn't have coffee. We just had lots of alcohol that we weren't supposed to have in this dorm. And anyway, there was a coffee house reading that was loosely arranged to bring together people who were interested in this literary magazine. And at Glassboro College, going back to the 60s, they had named their coffee houses Gold Bugs. And one of the people at those Gold Bugs was Patti Smith. So I was on this huge Patti Smith thing back then in the 80s, rediscovering that she went to Glassboro and she was involved with the same literary magazine. And I was one of the people to help bring back this name, Goldbug. And we began 20 years later to have Goldbug get-togethers. That was just the name we gave to it, to kind of give it that continuity. One of the Goldbug get-togethers we had, against the rules, was in this old, one of the oldest dorms on the college still around. There was a place called Oak in Laurel Hall. And in Laurel Hall, in the basement, we kind of just took it over one night, really. And the party was in honor of Lou Reed. It was his birthday. And we brought together a bunch of people who were going to read, who were going to perform. And the first person who read, I still have buried somewhere in my archives, is the list. We would just pass around a piece of paper, and you would just write your name, where you went, when you wanted to do your thing. Was Jim Gracie. So we did this, very inebriated get-together. It was Goldbug. And I had also invited some friends from down here at the shore, people who were still living down here. And one of my friends, John Leach, had invited other close friends, including this guy named Steve, who was a great drummer, and he was also a magician. Steve came to the get-together, and then after the reading, kind of just disappeared. Nobody could find him. And the next morning, we discovered he was arrested. He had somehow gotten into a confrontation with some local police folks from Glassboro for disorderly conduct, drunkenness. I forget exactly what it was. Fast forward just a few months later, Steve is now in a municipal building disputing the charges. And who did he bring as his lawyer? He brought James Randi. So Steve had been kind of an apprentice to the same James Randi, who was one of the important folks debunking the Cottingley Fairies. So that's one of my, it's all connected tangents. Let's get back to the story. All right, so we're back at the Ambassador Hotel. The seance is over. Houdini has looked at this automatic writing that has supposedly been transmitted from his mother. The writing is in English, and above the writing, Mr. or Sir Conan Doyle's wife had put a little cross on it, and it was a very bland kind of, this could apply to anybody, warm message reaching out from supposedly Houdini's mom, saying how much she missed him and blah, blah, blah. Well, very shortly afterward, Houdini kind of let it be known to Doyle that he knew this was all bullshit, and that this kid had been his mother because she never spoke a word of English, and yet he still really liked Conan Doyle, and he really appreciated their friendship. So they kind of tried to keep it this potential blow up between them. That originally was just he tried not to turn it into a huge thing, but eventually, of course, it did. And within a few years, their friendship had really been strained under this. So, yeah, the famous seance that happened in Atlantic City at the Ambassador Hotel was to mark a real end in this uncanny friendship between these two, and in the bigger picture, when people are looking into, the claims of the paranormal and claims of the supernatural and claims of being able to communicate with people we've lost and are, of course, deceased, this famous seance does come up quite a lot. It's kind of a marker. It's kind of I tried to go with you on this. No, it didn't work for me. I could easily show you that once again, you're just getting deluded by seeing what you want to see. So to kind of bring this whole thing back home, I just do want to show in the show notes some wonderful links to some absolutely fantastic photos from this time. There's another just absolutely wonderful photo of the family of Conan Doyle and the two people, Houdini dead center looking straight at the camera, reclining next to him, Doyle, a bunch of kids just goofing around, and it's so obvious this is the Atlantic City Boardwalk, and it's just such a great time travel kind of photo, like as you stroll the boardwalk in Atlantic City. You just think, yeah, well, it's just a schlocky boardwalk. There's not much left, but there is so much. There was so much magical stuff that happened here, including, like I said, Houdini, and one more thing, to bring it all back home. Another interesting bunch of folks that also hung out at all of these piers were the Three Stooges. So, including going back to where the podcast started with the B.F. Keith Garden Pier, the Stooges played there too. The Stooges performed at Steel Pier. The Stooges performed at $1 Million Pier, and including Houdini too. Houdini also would do stunts at $1 Million Pier, which ended up becoming the pier where I used to work. To go back to where we started, with that wonderful scene out of James Joyce, and its continued use with Julian Barnes, a pier is designed in a similar way to a bridge. It is stretching out over the water, but unlike a bridge, it is not connecting to some other side. And it's just a wonderful pun that the idea of a pier is this failed bridge, or disappointed bridge, or something that's thwarted in its purpose. So again, to go back to Barnes, a pier is a disappointed bridge, but if you stare at it long enough, you can dream it to the other side. And I suppose that's really the theme of this podcast, today, is that, a lot of times when we use our love or passion or curiosity about photography, we are in some ways inviting some extra step to happen. We're inviting the ordinary to become a kind of extraordinary. We're inviting the idea that maybe there is more there if you find yourself at that right spot. If you bring the elements of light and composition and timing and subject matter together, maybe you will be able to fulfill that connection. And going back to good old Jim Morrison, maybe this is another part of that theme of breaking on through. And if you do go back to the lyrics of breaking on through, it is very, very much a kind of dialogue between what's in front of you and then immediately what's frustrating you. It is very much a dialogue that you could say hints at some of Morrison's themes of bringing in and bringing out a rebellion against what we're limited by, but at the same time acknowledging that these limits could just be part of what we think are there. And if we can just change our thinking, maybe they're not there. That constant play between is it impossible or maybe if we can just break on through, open that door and go through it, maybe there is something else out there. Maybe we can see the dream of the other side. And I definitely have, I'm sure a lot of folks at different points in your life, you're going to experience loss. And what is photography but a kind of keepsake, originally of that person or thing that has been lost, and why are we collecting all these images? Why do we hold on to images, say, of our loved ones who have passed? What is lurking in that photo? Is there some way by putting it right in front of us, whether it's the physical print or the image on our screen, why does it have so much importance? And is there some way that within that technology or that re-imaging, that point where that moment in time which has passed, it's gone. We're just collecting these moments in time. Where is that point where it is no longer past? It's becoming alive again, Yeah, and can it be? Is it going back to Pyrrhus? Is it just another quote unquote victory that's going to that is meaningless? You know what I'm saying? So again, going back to the original quote, it was all about Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus's so-called victories were, if anything, destroying them. This battle against the Romans, the Carthaginians are seemingly winning these small battles, but if anything, they're just depleting their resources. They're depleting their soldiers. They're surviving, but they're really not winning. So what is winning? What is the win here? We can take these photos, we can hold on to moments in the past that are lost and people that we love that are lost. But are we still connecting? Can we actually connect back in time? And I guess that's been a big theme, I suppose, about these extra episodes of the podcast, whether it's reconnecting to this empty lot, that used to have the band jamming all summer. Is it walking along the boardwalk in Atlantic City and looking out and realizing at this exact spot Houdini was hanging upside down? Or, walking by the Tropicana Hotel and realizing that this is the exact location that the friendship between Conan Doyle and Houdini more or less fell apart. Yeah, Interesting questions. Don't really have the answers necessarily. But yeah, thank you again for sticking around for this extra long episode. Trying to pull together these connections. We've definitely encountered a lot of characters, trying to round this up. So again, the Garden Pier, where B.F. Keith's amazing theater was, Harry Houdini, the Seances, the Cottingley photos of the so-called fairies, the Doors, going back to 85, where Jim Gracie and I were bonding so much over finding the themes behind the Doors Break On Through. And just for one last little connection, another friend who I had met just a couple years earlier, when I had visited Paris for the first time, I did spend a little bit of time, like anyone does who was a Doors fanatic, at Père Lachaise, where the remains of Jim Morrison are today, visited by millions of people. But I had also met someone on the train the night before who I became friends with, and we went out together named Mary, and she just recently passed away. So I've had these connecting themes around loss and around photos, because that's her sister was reaching out to me after she passed to try to collect some photos of Mary, and I found a photo of us in New York City a few years ago, a decade ago, I guess, where that became the photo that she used for her memorial. And it's just these touch points, these connections where photography touches so many areas in our lives that are either connecting us or showing us that it is a disappointed bridge. We can only go so far, and then it stops, and you're just staring out at this endless kind of empty horizon. Anyway, guys, I'll be back with just a regular camera stuff for the next episode. Hope you survived this episode. Thanks again.